Our big focus, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is now on the second leg of his five-nation tour. You remember it's his longest diplomatic tour in the last decade. Now, during this touchdown in Trinidad and Tobago, he is expected to further strengthen our bilateral relationship. The Prime Minister actually addressed the Indian community in Port of Spain, where he spoke about their ancestral links to India, praised their cultural contributions, and said it was an honor to bring with him a replica of the Ram Mandir and holy water from the river Sarayu in Ayodhya, recalling the community's earlier gesture of sending Shilas and sacred water for the temple's construction. Just listen in to the Prime Minister's remarks in Trinidad, followed by Urvashi's report.
They left their soil, but not their soul. They were not just migrants. They were messengers of a timeless civilization. Their contributions have benefited this country culturally, economically, and spiritually.
Well, Namaste, New Delhi TV. I'm Urvashi Tiwari Rupnarayan, and I'm coming to you from the National Cycling Center in Couva, Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, your Prime Minister Narendra Modi would have left Ghana on an official visit. He came to Trinidad and Tobago also on an official visit, and when he departs here, he'll be heading to Buenos Aires. Now, his visit here is very significant. You may ask yourselves why. Well, Trinidad and Tobago has the highest population of members of the Indian diaspora in the Caribbean and also South America. We're averaging at just over 500,000, which is half of our population are members of the Indian diaspora. Now, of course, that is significant because we have those members in various fields. They are in education, they are in the legal fraternity, they are esteemed doctors, they are lawyers, and of course, our Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, is the first female Prime Minister of our country, but she's also the first female Prime Minister of Indian origin.
Moving on, the US House of Representatives passed Republicans' sweeping tax and spending legislation, sending the so-called Big Beautiful Bill to President Donald Trump's desk. The measure's passage, following an all-night legislative session during which Republicans quashed internal opposition, comes just before Trump's deadline of the 4th of July and reflects his sustained sway over the party. The legislation reduces social safety net programs to pay for extended tax cuts, enacting new ones, and boosting spending on immigration, as well as boosting spending on defense. Democrats, by the way, are already laying the groundwork to campaign on the bill in the 2026 midterm elections, hitting their Republican colleagues on the safety net cuts and projected impact on the federal deficit. In fact, recent polls have shown the legislation is deeply unpopular. Moving on to the other crucial headline we're tracking, trade talks between India and the United States are heating up in Washington, with both sides pushing towards a potential interim agreement likely to be unveiled, hopefully in a few hours. The agreement follows months of negotiations catalyzed by US President Donald Trump's historic tariffs that were announced on the 2nd of April. But at the heart of the negotiations are tariff reductions and reciprocal market access. Indian officials have made it clear that without broader tariff cuts, particularly on high employment sectors like textiles, footwear, and leather, the ambition of doubling trade volume will remain out of reach. In fact, the advisor to the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, Mark Linscott, has said he's confident an interim trade deal between India and the US is imminent since both sides have reached the necessary compromises. Natasha Esrani has been tracking the insider details for us. She joins us live at the moment. Natasha, how soon can we realistically expect a deal between India and the US? And are we still optimistic about a surprise on the 4th of July?
Well, there was so much attention, as you covered earlier in the program, on the big, beautiful bill in US Congress, and that's going to be signed July 4th. I'm not sure that'll be accompanied by the Indo-US trade deal as well. But yes, there's a good chance that this bill, the deal will be ironed out before that July 9th deadline. So somewhere between July 4th and July 9th is my guess. But there is increasingly a lot of positive noises that we're hearing from both the American side and the Indian side, but with necessary compromises, as you mentioned earlier. While India is seeking greater market access to its labor-intensive goods, the US wants more duty concessions on its agricultural products and its dairy products. And time again, we hear that's where the challenges have stayed, because India is very wary about allowing these big American farming companies to come in to compete with farmers in India who traditionally have small holdings and a lesser number of cattle. They won't be able to compete. And the Indian government is trying to protect them. In fact, historically, dairy and agriculture is kept out of trade deals, even with other countries like Australia and the UK. So that's been the sticking point. But apparently there have been some progress on that front. And there's a chance that India might allow apples and nuts in, but still draw those red lines on products like wheat.
Natasha, as always, thank you so much for breaking down the details for us. Well, what happens when the world's biggest superpower tries to rewrite what India grows, eats, and fuels its economy with? Well, behind closed doors, a mega trade deal between India and the United States is taking shape, but at the heart of it is a sharp tug of war over corn, soybean, ethanol, and dairy. This isn't just about tariffs or trade routes. It's about India's farmers, our food safety, and also our fuel independence. Let me just break down what's really going on. Let's start with corn. The US produces almost 9 times more corn than India, and almost all of it is genetically modified. India doesn't grow GM corn, and we don't allow it in except under tight quotas and only with steep tariffs. So where's the twist then? Well, nearly half of India's ethanol, the stuff that blends into your petrol, now comes from corn. The US says, let us export GM corn just for ethanol production. It won't enter your food chain, which sounds fairly clean, right? But not quite. Indian sugar mills already losing ground fear that this move could crush domestic sugarcane demand. And politically, it's a landmine, especially with Bihar, India's third biggest corn producer, heading into elections. Next, let's move on to ethanol itself. The US is the world's largest ethanol exporter, and it wants India to open up fuel ethanol imports. But India says no for good reason. Fuel-grade ethanol in India is more than green energy. It's actually a strategic tool to reduce oil imports and give our farmers a market for sugarcane and grains. Letting cheap American ethanol in, well, that undermines the whole point. Then comes soybean. Well, India allows GM soy oil, but not GM beans or the soy protein cake used for livestock feed. Why? Because the GM protein is in the bean, not the oil. And that's where the safety and environmental concerns lie. The US wants to change this. But soybean is grown on over 13 million hectares in states like Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Rajasthan. And prices, well, they're already crashing. More imports now, that's political suicide. And finally, dairy. This one's actually non-negotiable. India's tariffs on milk powder and butter are already sky high, up to 60%. And there's a cultural red line too. Imported dairy must come from cows, not fed animal byproducts. The US says it's unscientific, India says it's non-negotiable and deeply cultural as well. Still, some experts believe the US may use dairy as a bargaining chip to push through access on corn and ethanol. But the bottom line, this deal isn't just about goods crossing borders. It's about who controls the future of Indian agriculture, who controls the future of Indian food systems and our fuel supply. And for now, India is holding firm. The other big story we're tracking, Russian President Vladimir Putin told US President Donald Trump that he won't back down from his goals in Ukraine, a day after Washington said it halted some weapon shipments to Kyiv. The leader's hour-long call comes as Moscow has intensified its attacks on Ukraine, pounding cities with drone and missile strikes. Ukraine actually worries that those attacks could become more lethal after the Trump administration abruptly stopped the delivery of air defense interceptors and other weapons. That decision signals diminishing American commitment towards Kyiv and will mean more death and a longer war, is what experts are arguing as we speak. But Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky is likely to lobby for more support in a call with Trump today, as in Friday.
We had a call. It was a pretty long call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran. And we also talked about, as you know, the war with Ukraine. And I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy about that.
Progress with him on a deal with Ukraine? Do you feel like you made any progress?
No, I didn't make any progress with him today at all.
My colleague Vishal Vivek has been tracking all the finer developments for us. He joins us live at the moment. Vishal, take us through the key takeaways from this hour-long call, and we're given to understand that Zelensky is likely to dial Trump today as well?
That is exactly right, and the biggest takeaway is that the stalemate continues. The Russia-Ukraine war that has been continuing for more than 3 years now has killed thousands of people, probably more than 2 lakh people according to various estimates, is most likely continuing, and there's no end in sight. The peace talks that had been started by the US, that also seem to have been stalled, because in the last few days Russia clearly said that it is nowhere nowhere close to having any kind of peace talks and nowhere close to having any kind of deal with Ukraine. At the same time, US blames Russia for stalling the talks. Russia doesn't accept that blame. So this deadlock continues, and there's no end in sight to the conflict. As you mentioned, there's also this angle of US halting some of the weapons shipment to Ukraine. That will also play an angle. Whether Ukraine can sustain the attacks that Russia has been conducting in the recent past. So all of that will come into the picture, but the deadlock continues, and the war is far from ending.
Charles, as always, thanks so much for joining us with the latest information coming in. Meanwhile, White House envoy Steve Witkoff is planning to meet the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Oslo next week to restart nuclear talks. This is what reports state. Now, I'll tell you why this is so significant. The reports state that a final date hasn't been set, but neither country has publicly confirmed this meeting. But if it happens, it would mark the first direct talks since US President Donald Trump ordered an unprecedented military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities last month. By the way, the United States imposed sanctions against a business network that smuggles Iranian oil disguised as Iraqi oil, as well as sanctions targeting a Hezbollah-controlled financial institution. The network of companies run by Iraqi businessman Salim Ahmed Saeed has been buying and shipping billions of dollars worth of Iranian oil disguised as or blended with Iraqi oil since at least 2020. This is what the US Department has said in its latest statement. With that, let's turn our attention to our neighborhood. Foreign Affairs Advisor to Bangladesh's interim government, Mohammad Tawhid Hussain, has indicated that the country's interim government is actively pursuing the extradition of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina from India a year after her ousting from the country. Meanwhile, Bangladesh parties are discussing a caretaker election government. Saurabh Gupta has the insider details.
Well, Bangladesh is discussing major reforms and constitutional reforms as it prepares for elections, and currently there's an interim government in place. But during elections, Bangladesh has always had the practice of having a caretaker government, something that was abolished a few years ago, and that verdict was of course upheld by several court orders, but that has also been challenged. Now, what's the difference between this interim government and a caretaker government? Well, for starters, this caretaker government is usually installed only for elections, and whether the interim government under Muhammad Yunus will continue for these elections, or whether there will be a caretaker government led by a non-partisan chief advisor, is something that is still up for discussion. As of now, it seems Muhammad Yunus will see Bangladesh through these elections, and then of course major reforms etc. can all take place simultaneously. But there is discussion, especially on the National Consensus Commission, about whether the caretaker government practice should be brought back and whether a non-partisan caretaker government should be installed that is acceptable to all parties. There were provisions for that. Should they go back to these old provisions? This is something that's being discussed, and that's why there is a certain element of doubt of whether the elections will be held under Muhammad Yunus's interim government or whether there will be a caretaker government that was usually the practice before it was abolished in Bangladesh.
Meanwhile, let's talk about the European travel nightmare. French air traffic controllers launched a two-day strike on Thursday as Europe braces for another summer defined by air travel nightmares. Hundreds of flights stand cancelled or delayed as we speak, affecting nearly 3 lakh passengers. Also reflecting the fragility of the continent's aviation network amid high demand and an understaffed air traffic control system. A pilot union leader actually told the media that every summer since COVID, it's been the worst summer until now. Airlines are increasingly irked. Ryanair, for example, launched a ranking of European countries that cause the most extra travel time. The US has faced similar woes, with officials capping the number of flights at the Newark airport after air traffic control shortages. Construction and tech outages caused severe disruptions at the New York City area hub earlier this year. Slipping into a quick break, back in a moment with the latest updates. Don't go anywhere. Well, Russia has accepted the credentials of a new Afghan ambassador to Moscow, making it the first country to extend diplomatic recognition to the Taliban since the Islamist movement retook power in the South Asian country in 2021. Now, this move, taken after a decision by President Vladimir Putin, will fuel productive bilateral cooperation between our countries in various fields. This is what Russia's foreign ministry has said in its latest statement. It also posted a picture of a deputy foreign minister, Andrei Rudenko, meeting newly appointed Afghan ambassador Gul Hassan earlier on Thursday, and the Taliban diplomats later raised the group's flag, the Muslim Declaration of Faith in black script on a white background, at the Afghan embassy. Switching tracks, Nvidia hit a market value of $3.92 trillion. That's trillion with a T, believe it or not, briefly putting it on track to become the most valuable company in history as Wall Street doubled down on optimism about artificial intelligence. The demand for AI chips has driven Nvidia's market value surge, and believe it or not, the valuation exceeds the total of Canadian and Mexican stock markets. Meanwhile, Arijit Singh, with 150 million Spotify followers, beats Taylor Swift, beats BTS to become the most followed artist globally. Spotify has crowned legendary Indian musician Arijit Singh as the most followed artist in the world, beating global stars like Taylor Swift, Billie Eilish, also beating BTS, The Weeknd and more. This marks the third time Arijit has topped the chart, and he's already a household name and widely regarded as one of India's greatest voices. He holds multiple hats, as you know. He holds the hat of a composer, singer, producer, and also a national award winner. He's now beaten some of the biggest Western names, including Ed Sheeran, Billie Eilish, and The Weeknd. Back in August, by the way, in 2023, he briefly surpassed Taylor Swift before slipping down. Switching tracks, Vijaykumar is arguably one of the world's most celebrated chefs. His restaurant Sema, set in the heart of Manhattan, has won a Michelin and become the first Indian restaurant to top the New York Times 100 Best Restaurants list. Most recently, though, he won the prestigious James Beard Award. Sam Daniel caught up with him. Here's a snippet for you.
Vijay, thank you very much for your time. Congratulations on this award. Awards, in a sense, are not new to you, but how important is this particular James Beard Award to you and for Indian cuisine?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here. Thanks a lot. And well, award. This is, I mean, any award is like blessing, right? I mean, this is any award is recognition, validation, and having James Beard Award is something very special. And definitely it's one of those prestigious award which they've been doing it for for many years. And this award is for it's not just for me. It's just for the chef who's been trying to do the Indian cuisine, and it's a responsibility. It's not just a validation recognition. I think it's a responsibility.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, sorry, one more thing I was going to say, like James Beard Award again, like why it's special, because there has been many years, and you know, an Indian. I mean, it's kind of historic. I mean, if you think about it, this is probably the time they started looking into Indian cuisine, they're rewarding Indian cuisine, they're recognizing Indian cuisine too. So I think it's a kind of historic moment, and it's definitely a blessing, and it's a lot of responsibility.
You come from a village in Tamil Nadu in Dindigul district, and in your acceptance speech, you fondly remembered your grandmother and your mother. Tell us about their role in shaping you as an international chef.
Well, definitely they play a lot of role. And you know, if you think about India, the whole India, like, you know, every single household, the mothers and grandmothers, they are the one who, you know, cook our meal, you know, who for their whole life. And sometimes we take things for granted. We don't even like appreciate how much effort they put in to make a meal. They bring joy to a table, and it was just so fascinating to see them, how much you know, like a heart and soul they put into make a food with the limited resources.
And finally, make way for the auto rickshaw bag, LV's boldest tribute to India yet. Following Prada's buzzworthy Kolhapuri sandals, Louis Vuitton is now grabbing attention with a one-of-a-kind handbag. This collection is making waves in the fashion world, with India stealing the spotlight this season. Here's a report that shows you why.
You must be wondering, where am I headed looking all dolled up with my LV bag? Well, it seems these days that the West is obsessed with our day-to-day things. From Kolhapuris to eating with our hands, and now an auto rickshaw. Chaliye bhaiya. At the recent Paris Men's Fashion Week, French luxury designer Louis Vuitton presented their Spring-Summer 26 collection titled Voyage to India, where creative director Pharrell Williams designed a line of India-inspired accessories, from auto rickshaw bags to snakes and ladder runway, and Sandook-style iconic LV trunks. The inspiration was Wes Anderson's 2007 film The Darjeeling Limited, for which designer Marc Jacobs and Louis Vuitton designed the costumes. The models walked on a giant hand-painted snakes and ladder runway by artist Bijoy Jain of Studio Mumbai to soundtrack by A.R. Rahman. Auto rickshaws have been around since the 1940s, but it has taken the Europeans almost 70 years to understand the charm of this easy breezy mode of public transportation. These accessories immediately gained attraction on the internet, and LV was appreciated for not just getting inspired, but also crediting the Indian culture and artisans unlike its competitor Prada. भैया, आपको क्या लगता है इस बैग का प्राइस कितना होगा?
500 का होगा भैया.
500 रुपए. Okay. Now I'm not sure what's the price of these Louis Vuitton bags, but getting to my destination will be definitely cheaper than that. चलिए भैया.